Hello everyone. I've been part of the competitive Pokemon community for nearly 10 years now, and I've got a good sense for what strategies people dislike. Most of it makes sense. People don't like RNG dependent archetypes like paralysis spam because they remove a lot of skill from the game and you often win or lose based on luck alone. People don't like stall because stall teams are often more heavily matchup reliant than other archetypes, and the games can take a really long time. People don't like pressure spam teams for those same reasons. These archetypes being less popular is expected. It's no mystery why people dislike them. There are countless archetypes and gimmicky strategies out there that people hate, and for good reason. But there are some strategies that get a lot of hate that I don't think deserve it at all. I've selected 5 strategies or moves that I like, despite them being generally disliked by the community, and I think you should like them too. Maybe this video will help change your mind. We'll go in order of increasing levels of hatred by the community. First up at number 5, we have Knockoff. A ton of people dislike this move, and many agree that it should be nerfed. If you look at the history of Knockoff, wanting it to be nerfed makes sense. It was introduced in Generation 3 as a 20 base power dark move that removes the target's item. It didn't get a power boost when removing that item either, although 20 to 30 base power wouldn't have done much anyway. Despite being incredibly weak, it was still considered a very good move on the Pokemon that got it. Knockoff wasn't significantly changed until Generation 6, where it got an insane buff. It went from 20 base power to 65 base power, and when removing an item, it gets a 50% power boost, making it 97.5 base power. This is the Knockoff that modern competitive Pokemon players are familiar with. Its power alone makes it the best stab option for most physical dark types, and removing an item as well is an amazing benefit. With this change, Knockoff went from being a move used almost exclusively by defensive Pokemon to one used by offensive Pokemon as well, like Weavile, Bisharp, and even many offensive Pokemon that weren't dark types. With this huge buff came a nerf as well though, the introduction of Mega Evolutions. Any Pokemon holding a Mega Stone could not have its item removed by Knockoff, and worse, it didn't get the power boost, so Knockoff was a 65 base power move against Mega Evolutions. Generation 7 nerfed Knockoff again by adding more Mega Evolutions and adding Z moves. Z Crystals interacted with Knockoff the same way as Mega Stones. Generations 8 and 9 though have no Megas or Z moves, but Knockoff kept its power increase, so in recent generations, Knockoff is without a doubt the strongest it's ever been. It has all the buffs and none of the nerfs. It's very powerful, has the incredibly potent side effect of removing items, and since no types or abilities provide a dark immunity, there's no way to be immune to Knockoff. Many say that Knockoff is just too easy to click, and in some ways, they're right. Especially early game, there are often few reasons not to click Knockoff. It's often the right play. Many say that Knockoff's power should be nerfed, maybe not to 20, but weaker than it is now. Without Mega Evolutions or Z moves, why should Knockoff stay this strong? While I understand this perspective, I think it's in everyone's best interest that Knockoff remains just as powerful as it is now. First of all, the fact that Knockoff is better than ever doesn't mean Knockoff is too much. Due to metagame factors, the move Sticky Web is also better than ever, and nobody's calling that broken. Secondly, there is a lot of counterplay for Knockoff, even without Mega Evolutions and Z moves. The most obvious one is the ability Sticky Hold, which prevents items from being removed in any way. Few Pokemon get this ability though. There are plenty of more common ways to work around Knockoff, such as disposable items like berries, air balloon, booster energy, eject button, red card, and more. If you utilize that item early on in the game, you can use that Pokemon as a switch into Knockoff later. Items like Rocky Helmet and abilities like Static, Flame Body, and Rough Skin can also punish Knockoff users. Sure, they'll still remove your item, but since Knockoff is a contact move, they may get hurt while doing so. There are also Pokemon like Clefable, Gliscor, and Corviknight that just don't much mind having their item removed. Third, think about what a Knockoff nerf would actually do. Say we reduced the power to 40, and it was 60 when removing an item. Defensive Pokemon using Knockoff, like Clefable, Gliscor, and Tornadus Therian, wouldn't really care. They don't deal much damage when using this move anyway, it's mostly about removing items. But offensive Pokemon, particularly dark types like Weavile, Meowscarada, and Hoopa, would be significantly nerfed. Knockoff is a great tool against bulky teams. Imagine how broken Stall would be if heavy-duty boots couldn't be removed. One of the best ways to pressure Stall, and bulky teams in general, is using hazards combined with powerful knockoff users. If we remove knockoff as a tool for offensive Pokemon, that's a huge buff for the most hated archetype in the game. I truly don't see why people think knockoff is too much. I think it's great that we have such a reliable, consistent progress-making tool that also serves as a stab for dark types. When you look at the history of knockoff, it makes sense why people say it's too much now, but if you think about what kind of metagame changes a knockoff nerf would cause, I don't think that's something most players would be happy with. Next up at number 4. Pivoting and pivot spam teams. Tons of players, especially those more familiar with VGC, absolutely hate pivoting. And when I say pivoting, I'm referring to moves like U-turn, Volt Switch, Parting Shot, Teleport, and such. So why are these moves hated? Well, the main argument is that they're just too easy to click. Especially in the longer games of competitive singles, the game will often be won by the player who's better at option coverage, that is, selecting a move that does well against many moves your opponent might make. By clicking a pivoting move, you can often cover every single play your opponent can make. For example, suppose your Tyranitar is facing your opponent's Choice Band Scizor. Scizor can outspeed and kill Tyranitar with a U-turn, making it an excellent choice if you leave Tyranitar on the field. But if you switch Tyranitar out, Scizor will U-turn, deal damage to whatever came in, and then switch into a counter for that Pokemon. It's basically a complete checkmate situation. I've seen VGC players call singles a bunch of skill-less pivot spamming, and many in the singles community consider teams with many pivoting moves to be cheap and lacking skill. The reality is, the skill issue often lies with the people who complain about pivoting moves. That's largely because counterplay for pivoting often involves long-term thinking, which less experienced players struggle with more. Let's go back to our example with Tyranitar and Scizor. This seems like a checkmate situation, but you can minimize how much damage your team ends up taking. You can switch your Tyranitar out into something that both resists U-turn and encourages your opponent to bring in a Pokemon that you can deal with easily. For example, you can switch in your Corviknight against the Scizor U-turn, knowing it will bring your opponent's Zapdos out, but you can deal with Zapdos easily next turn by switching into your Ting-Lu. This kind of maneuver is simple for higher level players, but for less skilled or experienced players, considering all the factors involved in this sequence, can be very difficult. Pivoting is also much less effective if hazards are on the side of the person using pivoting moves. Switching around isn't fun if Stealth Rock or Spikes are on the field. Less experienced players often underestimate the value of entry hazards. And, to go back to our Tyranitar and Scizor example, you can also play in such a way that your Tyranitar never has to face a Scizor head-on. A skilled player will know that such a beneficial situation is desirable for their opponent, and they might even use Tyranitar as bait to bring Scizor in while Tyranitar switches into a counter. There are also cases where the pivoting move won't kill the Pokemon you have on the field. Maybe a Dragapult clicks U-turn against your Garchomp, expecting you to be scared out by Draco Meteor, but you can be aggressive and stay in and punish your opponent hard. There's lots of counterplay for pivoting, but none of it is easy or simple. If you hate pivoting, I suspect it's because you don't know how to deal with it. But I'm not just saying you shouldn't hate pivoting, I'm saying you should like it. That's because it enables a lot of frail offensive Pokemon that are very popular and generally loved. Hoopa Unbound, Lokix, Hisuian Arcanine, and other fan favorites are almost always paired with lots of pivots. These Pokemon are extremely strong, but due to mediocre or poor defensive stats and typing, they often struggle to switch in. Pokemon like this would see far less usage without pivoting. So don't hate pivoting, learn to deal with it, and use it in your teams to enable more creativity. Next up, at number 3, it's another strategy that involves switching, Regenerator and Regenerator cores. People absolutely hate this ability. It heals 33% of the Pokemon's health when it switches out. This is a crazy amount of health, and it's pretty obvious that this ability was balanced for doubles. In VGC, where games are much shorter and teams are much more offensive, switching isn't nearly as good. By extension, Regenerator isn't nearly as good of an ability. But even there, it's still not a bad ability by any means. In singles, though, Regenerator alone can elevate a Pokemon from completely unused to an absolute top tier. It's one of the best abilities in the game, and there are a lot of reasons people hate it. First of all, stall teams often make use of Regenerator Pokemon. Alomomola and Toxapex are both stall staples. Secondly, people often use several regenerator Pokemon together and switch them back and forth to create a cycle of healing that some passive teams have no way of getting past. Many players have felt helpless against these cores. Third, many feel as though regenerator Pokemon just allow for too much safety. If a Pokemon with Regenerator loses 90% of its health taking a big attack, restoring it to full health is often very easy, just by switching around. Typical consequences don't apply to Pokemon with Regenerator, which many find rage-inducing. And fourth, Regenerator Pokemon are often pivots. It makes sense to pair Regenerator with Pivoting, since they heal when switching out, and pivot moves switch you out. All three Regenerator Pokemon in the Overused tier, which is the main format for competitive singles, are primarily used as pivots. So on top of being hated for Regenerator alone, Regenerator Pokemon have the hate of pivoting stacked on them as well. I've already addressed why I think pivoting is good, but Regenerator pivots in particular are great at supporting frail Pokemon. Non-regenerator pivots like U-turn Corviknight have to click Roost sometimes to stay healthy, so they can't click U-turn nearly as often as something like an Alomomola can click Flip Turn. The fact that regenerator pivots can click pivoting moves so much more often than any typical pivot makes them the absolute best choices for supporting Pokemon that have trouble switching in. Hoopa Unbound and Low-Kicks, two frail Pokemon I mentioned earlier, are paired with Alomomola and Galarian Slowking more than everything else except Great Tusk, which has such high usage that it's the most common partner for many Pokemon. Another example, earlier this generation I hit rank 1 on the ladder with Choice Specs Thundurus Therian, and I couldn't have done it without the help of Regenerator pivots. But Regenerator Pokemon aren't just great for supporting frail Pokemon, they're also incredibly useful against stall teams. Now, as I said, Regenerator is a tool for stall, but most Regenerator Pokemon hurt stall way more than they help it. Galarian Slowking is probably the best Pokemon in the tier against stall teams. It can pressure stall with Future Sight, it absorbs Toxic Spikes, and with Regenerator plus the move Chilly Reception, it can allow any Pokemon on your team to enter safely, without having to worry about taking too much damage, since stall Pokemon greatly struggle to outdamage Regenerator. Alomomola is similarly great against stall. Like Glowking, it helps your team members enter safely, and it can keep your entire team healthy with Wish. Hydrapple is an amazing stall breaker, especially with Nasty Plot Life Orb sets. No stall team can take repeated hits from a Hydrapple, but it would be super easy for stall teams to chip down its health if it didn't have Regenerator. Furthermore, even if your team has no good way of breaking stall, if you have two Regenerator Pokemon on your team, you can switch between them forever when facing stall teams and force a tie. Stall teams definitely love having Regenerator Pokemon on their team, but they hate facing Regenerator Pokemon far more. Also, like with pivoting, the counterplay to Regenerator Pokemon often involves long-term thinking. For example, using Knockoff against Alomomola might not do much damage now, but if you set hazards, it will be impactful later. You can also take advantage of Regenerator Pokemon by doing things that don't involve just directly attacking them, like setting hazards, setting up a substitute, or boosting your stats. Less experienced players are more likely to just keep clicking attacks, which, unless those attacks do a lot of damage, isn't that effective against Regenerator Pokemon. So a lot of the hate for Regenerator is once again coming from people who just don't know how to deal with it. I think I've said enough and we can move on, but for those interested, I actually have a full video breaking down why I think Regenerator pivots are so great for the metagame. I'll link that in the description. Before we get to the top 2, if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing and or leaving a like. It helps out a lot. Alright, at number 2 we have Hazard Stack. Hazard Stack teams have 4 crucial components: a Stealth Rock setter, a Spike setter, a Ghost-type Pokemon to block Rapid Spin, and a powerful Pokemon with Knockoff to remove the opponent's heavy-duty boots. The game plan of these teams is simple. Set hazards, make sure the opponent doesn't remove them, and then start pressuring the opponent with offensive Pokemon that now have the benefit of hazards. These offensive Pokemon will almost always have Knockoff, so that if the opponent enters safely with their heavy-duty boots, that item is removed, and they won't be able to safely bring that Pokemon in when it switches in next time. There are several reasons why people hate Hazard Stack teams. The biggest reason is that people tend to feel like dying to hazards is just a cheap way to get a kill. Most people hate seeing their Pokemon die to entry hazards instead of just an actual attack, like how Pokemon normally die. The next big reason is Gholdengo. Not only is Gholdengo able to block Rapid Spin, it's also able to block a Defog thanks to its ability Good as Gold. Gholdengo is the best removal blocker ever. Gholdengo wasn't the only insane tool that Hazard Stack teams got this generation, though. They also got Hisuian Samurott, the best spike setter ever. It can set spikes with its powerful signature move, Ceaseless Edge. This also bypasses the ability Magic Bounce, a formerly reliable tool against Hazard Stack teams. Removal options were also greatly reduced in Generation 9. Defog, once the primary way to remove hazards, is now very limited in distribution. The combination of reduced defog distribution and the addition of Gholdengo and Hisuian Samurott has made Hazard Stack stronger than ever before. And this is another big reason why people hate it. When there's an archetype that wasn't good in the past and it suddenly becomes top tier, many people feel they simply shouldn't be losing to it because it's gotten too strong relative to how it was. Many also blame Hazard Stack teams for the prevalence of heavy-duty boots. A lot of people find this item boring, and since boots grants an immunity to hazards, it's not hard to see how Hazard Stack teams could be blamed for this item being so common, especially with the meteoric rise of Hazard Stack as an archetype. And while I agree that Hazard Stack is better than ever, I don't think it's too much. We don't see Hazard Stack teams dominating tournaments or having ridiculous usage on the ladder. They're much more common and better than in past generations, but not so much that these teams are overbearing. There is plenty of counterplay to Hazard Stack. Rapid spinners like Great Tusk and Iron Treads have the tools to get past most of the spin blockers in the metagame. And there are options like Cinderace with Court Change and Galarian Weezing with Neutralizing Gas plus Defog to get past Gholdengo's Good as Gold. Now, Hazard Stack teams do have ways of pressuring common rapid spinners and counterplay to Cinderace and Weezing, but that's how it should be. An archetype that's helpless against certain tools is just an inconsistent matchup fish. If you just hate playing against Hazard Stack, that's personal preference, and I can't argue against that. But I think it's great that Hazard Stack is more viable and consistent than it has been in previous generations. It's added another archetype to the mix, and its success hasn't made other archetypes noticeably worse or less viable. Diversity of Pokemon and team structures is generally considered a good thing. I also don't buy that Hazard Stack teams are to blame for heavy-duty boots being everywhere. Boots were introduced in Generation 8, before Gholdengo, Hisuian Samurott, and the removal of Defog from many Pokemon's move pools, yet heavy-duty boots were still everywhere. Hazards in general are what make heavy-duty boots so common, and almost every archetype uses Stealth Rock at least. So everyone is to blame for boots being everywhere. Hazard Stack teams only make the problem marginally worse. The most valid criticism of Hazard Stack is probably that there are a lot of cases in which a Rapid Spin Pokemon has to predict whether you'll have to switch into a spin blocker or not, and the game can hinge on that 50-50. That can be pretty lame, I'll agree. But true 50-50s are rare, and you can often beat Hazard Stack teams without having to rely on predictions. Now for number 1. It's Toxic. The move Toxic that badly poisons the opponent. In Generation 9, a crazy amount of Pokemon lost Toxic that had learned it in Generation 8. This might be a weird fact for those who have only played Generation 9, but in Generation 7, almost every single Pokemon in the game got the move Toxic. Kartana got Toxic, Hawlucha got Toxic, Tyrantrum got Toxic. No matter how little a Pokemon had anything to do with poison, it got Toxic. Then things changed a little bit in Generation 8. All the Pokemon from Gen 7 and before still got Toxic, but there were a lot more sparing with distribution of this move on new Pokemon. Dragapult, Corviknight, and Barraskewda did not get Toxic. They only gave Toxic to new Pokemon where it made logical sense, like Toxtricity. But in Generation 9, they went a step further and took Toxic away from all the Pokemon that learned it in previous generations. Now, the only things that learn Toxic are Poison type and some Pokemon where it thematically makes sense. Hundreds of Pokemon lost Toxic. This move pool deletion was largely celebrated by the community. Many players were tired of a random Pokemon clicking Toxic and poisoning a crucial Pokemon. And it's true that in the past, literally anything could randomly have Toxic. I don't see this mass removal of Toxic as a win, though. I think it was a really good and healthy move to have around. It offered a tool to make progress for a lot of Pokemon with poor move pools or bad attacking stats. In Generation 9, I managed to make Toxicroak work in top ladder OU using a defensive set on Rain. This set uses Toxic, and if it didn't have that move, it would be unusable. Toxic made Toxicroak way less passive, and gave it the ability to put pressure on top-tier threats like Great Tusk, Landorus, and Zamazenta. Bellabolt also gets Toxic in Gen 9, and a team hit rank 1 on the ladder using a Toxic Bellabolt set. This move is so important to a lot of niche low-tier Pokemon, particularly low-tier defensive Pokemon. In previous generations, Gastrodon, Porygon 2, Arcanine, and various forms of Rotom other than just Rotom Wash had a place in OU because they could run Toxic. Some offensive Pokemon would use it as well. It was great on Tapu Bulu to help wear down birds like Zapdos and Tornadus. Zygarde 10% used it to poison incoming bulky waters that it couldn't 2-hit KO normally. Volcanion would use it to deal with walls like Blissey and Gastrodon. It was also used on more common Pokemon to become more consistent. Pokemon like Heatran, Buzzwole, and Garchomp were a lot more reliable as defensive Pokemon thanks to Toxic. Now, I will also acknowledge that every Pokemon having access to Toxic was a great tool for stall teams, and I do like that Blissey can't poison me anymore. Despite this, everything having Toxic meant that every Pokemon had at least one great move, a move that could do real damage to even the super massive base stat total top tiers, as long as they weren't immune. As someone who specializes in building around underrated low-tier Pokemon, I can't tell you how many times a low-tier having Toxic made it way more viable. Without this move being so widely distributed, a lot of really cool Pokemon got a lot worse. I hope Toxic returns to its former glory in coming generations, but I honestly doubt it will. Well, that's my list. Do you agree with me on any of these? And if not, did I change your mind on any of them, or do you still hate them? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to subscribe and leave a like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.